Hello, everybody, and welcome to the LJL Officially Unofficial Podcast, episode 31. I will be one of your many co-hosts, Alex, otherwise known as Lexi, go by MaskedSwan on the internet. And if I may introduce firstly the cordial man himself, Nymaera, otherwise known as Alex. Nymaera, good sir, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's been a little while. We've got some actual content to talk about.
We really do. And where we be without the panegyric man himself, Samuel Initia1ise and Nymaera, welcome to the podcast.
Hang on, what does that word mean?
Oh man, was it panegyric?
Yeah, panegyric, yes.
Oh man, hang on, I used that in context.
He doesn't know!
The man with the English degree doesn't know it.
Okay, yeah, no, I do know it, but
I'm not using it that very correctly, I don't think.
Yeah, that's possibly a little bit. So it's to go off the definition here of panegyric. It is a formal public speech, written verse delivered in high praise of a personal thing.
I mean, you are our play-by-play caster,
exactly.
so
Yeah.
and you like to
I prepare panegyric statements all the time.
You really do, sir. Welcome to the podcast. Initialize.
Thank you.
What is this podcast, though?
This podcast is the latest and greatest bit of Japanese content for the LJL, the Japanese League of Legends scene. There isn't a lot of English content out there. One or two translators aside,
which we love.
We do very much. LOL Ninja out there doing some great work. But for the rest of us, we provide a little bit more bolster content, shoulder content to add on to your LJL viewing experience.
Some lad-on-lad content is what you're getting there. Wait, that came out wrong. That came out wrong. I didn't. I thought I was trying to go for the lads on tour. Whatever. Oh, God.
Oh, sweet.
Nymaera, save me. Are we associated with papayas or anything along those lines?
We're not associated with anything that Lexi says or anything else.
We're never getting associated.
We're also not associated with Riot Japan, any kind of branch of Riot at all. We do this all on our own. We have done it all year long, and hopefully we plan to do it into the future too. But hopefully that means that we are around and have some grounding for what we're saying.
Yes, and as Nymaera was saving us, this is all our views and opinions. Everything that comes out does not represent the LJL unofficial broadcast. It is merely our own, clearly crap that's coming out my mouth, and then the opinions of these two lovely gentlemen. Gentlemen, you can also have people find your social medias account if right underneath your lovely faces at Initia1ise with a 1 at Nymaera, and you can find below at LJL Unofficial for our Twitter and at LJL_officially_unofficial for our other social media handles. This podcast does go out also over on YouTube, but you can also find it on all audio streaming platforms that you can enjoy, including Spotify, Anchor, and everything else. Gentlemen, it's been a little bit, but we're back as good as ever, and we've got some news now in regards to Worlds. So this is going to be a slightly different podcast than what we normally do, won't it, gentlemen?
Yep. So I think that it's fair to say now things are getting more international. It's our first international tournament of the year.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people who will be listening in who have not really followed the LJL. So hopefully we can give you guys some extra kind of context and background to the Team V3 that we sent to Worlds.
So we're going to be first going off straight into welcome to the world of V3, everybody. And this is where we're going to be giving a bit of a TLDR about V3. This is for our newer listeners, so we will have timestamps in the description as well as probably a pinned comment for one of us three and in the show notes as well. So you'll be able to skip past this if you are a more familiar listener. But for any of our new listeners out there, you'll be able to get our brief thoughts and a bit of a TLDR on who are V3 and what is this team and who are these players and everything. We're then going to jump straight over into play-ins and potentially the most competitive play-ins that has ever happened in the history of Worlds. And what a way to commemorate 10 years, gentlemen, for play-ins.
Well, massively true. I mean, it's of course the context of this year adds a bit of a shadow over everything. You know, we're still mid-COVID. We're still in a weird space with sort of bubbles and broadcasts and all the rest of it. VCS teams will be able to make it. But even so, the roster of play-ins teams looks exceptional. The play-ins format is very exciting. The groups themselves, which we'll touch on a bit later as well, I think are very exciting on top of that as well. So yeah, I think this is shaping up to be a really exciting and very competitive world.
And then lastly, we're going to be going over to World's group stage, and we're going to be giving an overview of our thoughts, certain teams not making it, the regions that will be represented there, and, well, who we're looking forward to be watching out of our main region, the LJL, as it's almost become, I think, by default, one of our main regions that each of us think about on a regular basis.
More LJL than any other region this year.
Yeah, not even joking.
Yep, so we've got that, and then we'll also just give our overview thoughts and coming to Worlds. This won't be a super long podcast, partly at the request of the feedback of our lovely audience, as well as partly because, well, we're not talking about just the LJL now. It's time to branch out and actually start covering more content. We're not quite sure where this podcast will be going. It might become we have two separate podcasts. We still don't quite know, but that's part of the fun. Make sure to follow us on our own social medias, though, to find out more of what we are doing. And Nymaera, aren't you excited for groups?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I think so. I think both of you have already alluded to the fact this is going to be a pretty tight race. It is going to be contested. I don't think there are going to be any particularly free victories for most of these teams. It's best of one, single round robin best of one. You don't even get to take what you've learned against one team to finish your final standings in the play-in group stage. And then we get straight into a best of five for most of the teams there too. Best of five's completely different beasts, and I'm sure that these teams all have very different identities throughout a series too. So it's a bit of a enigma to analysts now. I was kind of saying, okay, well, where do we go with this? We've not really dealt with this before, so that's why we're trying to pick things apart right now.
Yeah,
and that's our plan. But for all our lovely new listeners and for any returning listeners who have missed maybe a few episodes here and there and haven't quite kept up outside of the finals, well, no, I can understand there's far too much league sometimes to watch, and with everything else, gentlemen. First question that I put on the document for all of us to run through. Who are V3 Esports, gentlemen? Who is this roster?
So this is a long-standing-ish org in the LJL, not one of the absolute oldest. We're like, no, it's not a Rascal Jesters, it's not a Dead Nation Focus Me, but they've been around a couple years and they've been competing even when the playoffs format was a lot smaller and the top three teams used to get in. V3 were kind of perennially in there. Last year they got to the finals in summer, fell down to DFM. They rebuilt this year and they managed to pick up a bit of a winning formula in a bit of a surprise to some of us, actually. We didn't necessarily expect them to be contesting in the way they were, and hell, I am very happy to have been proved wrong. They've been fabulous towards the latter half of this year in particular.
They really have been. Go for it, Nymaera, go for it.
No, I was about to say, and V3, so they did end up promoting in 2018 spring to the LJL. They were in the challenge scene before. I believe, actually, Maple Street was on their org when that happened, so I talked to him a little bit about that. Yeah, I think he was in the backroom stats at that point. So anyone who's listening in from NA and remembers Maple Street, that's a little bit of a linking point for you. They were in the finals last year, though, as early as 2019 summer. So they have been competing in the LJL at the upper ends of the table for a while, but it was a very different roster. So they came in with a new roster this year too, which I'm sure we'll cover.
Yes, this new roster started at the beginning and through a lovely interview that happened with the top player of V3 Esports, Paz. We actually have some more information. Thank you to Lol Ninja for giving us that shout out for covering the finals in English, as well as also prompting our Discord and promoting that, which was honestly not expected. We didn't ask for it and they just did it. So thank you to the lovely crew over at Lol Ninja. But then they did this lovely interview and we got to learn a bit about the back room and how the team actually formed. Who wants to take this one?
Do you want to do it, Sam?
Yeah, I'll take definitely this. Do you want all the players or just the first one?
I can do if you do we can cut it half. You do the first two. You do the first two.
Okay, so that makes my life nice and easy. So let's start with Paz in the top lane. This guy last year was something of a carry player, was kind of playing particularly in the playoff, things like Camille in the top lane, got a lot of pressure. He's kind of transitioned more into being a bit more of a role player this year, but we know he has got it in him to pull out things like the Camille, previously the Aatrox, but that's less of a thing in meta right now. He's also become something of kind of like the house manager for the squad as well. He's something of the older brother, the team manager in the house. So he's had a lot on his plate this year, I think it's fair to say. And while V3 have generally focused towards the bot side, Paz's kind of weak side play has been pretty strong. Need to keep an eye on whether the team is willing to play around top side. They've struggled a little bit with that, but he's a pretty damn good player overall. Keep an eye on things like his Ornn as well. Very good on that.
So then how did Boogie join the team, Sam?
Yeah, so Boogie's a little bit more of an interesting one. Anyone who's been following international LoL for a couple of years may well remember Flash Wolves, the organization from LMS, now PCS. He was kind of the jungler before they disbanded. Got to MSI with them, I believe, in 2019? Yep. No, 2018?
Yep, last year.
Yeah, it was 19. There we go. He was a very good jungler, but he kind of didn't quite hit the highs he was looking for and ended up leaving the PCS region in a little bit of ignominy is probably the way to do it. It wasn't the kind of high send-off he was looking for. It wasn't like Karsa heading over to the LPL with his amazing raft of accolades as the Korean slayer behind him, that kind of deal. And V3 effectively traded junglers. Their old jungler, Baby, now named River, went to PSG Talon, who are actually in the playing stage, so I don't know if he can actually play.
River can't play in play,
which is very frustrating.
We've been deprived of storyline.
Because, of course, that was V3's old jungler, and Boogie came over from the PCS to join V3, and frankly, he has been a superstar. There is no other way to put it. The LJL has a lot of good junglers. We've got the likes of Steel, of Tussle, of Blank, of XS at KT fame, and then the hell above them all is Boogie, who is just phenomenal. He plays pretty much everything, and in Spring, while he was kind of forced to be just this hard carry player or bust, he's kind of been able to diversify his playstyle. Things like Trundle have come out. He's a great Lilia player now. He plays farming. He plays aggressive early. He's a fantastically Sin player. We know he has other tankier things in the background if he needs it. He's also quite a smart player in terms of how he plays his win conditions, particularly off the initial clear. It's like, okay, this is the only lane I can gank. If I don't get this gank off, we lose the game. He pulls it off consistently. I need to fight for the Scuttle Crab. My team will come and help me because I'll tell them we'll fight for the Scuttle Crab. That kind of coordination with his team on a myriad of different picks and styles is very impressive. Keep your eyes on a couple of his pocket picks like the Echo as well, which are always really good fun to see when he pulls out.
Yeah, I mean, Boogie has become a cornerstone for V3 and to play around. However, as we saw in the article, Paz did note that originally it wasn't the easiest coordination, and that's why we did see some problems for them in Spring. However, Paz was very forefront to say, we've worked out those problems and we're better than we've ever been. I am paraphrasing here and adding some of my own words here, but it's very much like he feels very confident in this roster.
That actually fits the storyline we had for Spring 2.
It does, actually.
Around about week 5 in Spring, when Sengoku and V3 both turned it on in a huge way. Both of them went on win streaks, and then V3 the very last couple of weeks ended up going to something like a 9-game win streak until they ended up losing the first game of their playoff series versus CGA, and they had to reverse sweep that series in a 3-2. But yeah, and that was when we started raising these storylines about V3, like, hey, guys, these aren't just the one-on-one every week team now. These guys are really playing well together. And that storyline persisted far into Summer too.
Yeah, and through there, I'm going to just quickly leapfrog backwards, though, sadly, because I need to just cover the last 3 players. So Ace, he was actually a member of the roster coming in to 2019. He was part of the roster in summer of 2019, and spring as well of 2019. However, he was actually brought in partly through Paz, who, when he came into this roster, the management of V3 said, hey, we're going to partly build this team around you, Paz. We want you to decide who we want to bring in. And Ace was one of the first players he brought in. And even with the huge roster change that did happen in Spring, Ace was kept on, as Paz did truly believe he wanted to have him on the team. And through that, Ace has proven to honestly be a sponge for knowledge and just to prepare and play around the team. He's incredibly selfless, and that was a narrative that I slightly pushed, I will be honest. But the man's Galio was banned every game against DFM, and that's selflessness because that man barely played his lane when he was on Galio. So
Yeah, no, I think...
Go on now.
Okay. I was about to say, I think the story of Ace is the story of a guy that has done a lot of exploring to find the role within the game which he is comfortable and effective playing. In spring, he ended up finding a couple of niche picks into that spring playoffs, as we're saying, which finally let us see why he was, kept on this team. His Syndra, which has been like a 40 KDA, which he hadn't played at all the rest of that split, started picking stuff like Rumble mid and making it work. Things kind of fell apart when he didn't find the right picks versus DFM in those spring playoffs. But then come into summer, one of the reasons that V3 have been so outstanding is the fact that they've managed to weaponize Ace finally.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like he's not necessarily known for being the strongest laner, but he has one or two picks which he can find some lane pressure on. Like previously, his Karma before that ended up getting a little nerf. His Syndra, of course, had some good news to it. And like things, of course, more recently, like his Zoe are pretty damn good. We have one or two slight concerns if he starts slaying.
I don't anymore. I don't.
Against the likes of Shie, I'm a little nervous.
I'll be honest, but from what we've heard, from what's been happening in boot camp and preparing for DFM specifically, and then moving on into Worlds, it seems like the MVP mid laner and the church that is around him of Aria.
All hail, praise be Aria.
The Lord has been blessing and ordaining Ace to continue the LJL and to carry the mantra of who should reign supreme in the mid lane. Ace has been getting boot camped against Aria, and that is unreal. And that also shows the kind of commitment, one, that Aria has to the LJL lads. That shows really good shit for us. We might not lose him. We might stay. But also, it just shows that there is commitment and that everyone is kind of rallying around V3, because I think partly, and this is a personal narrative, please be aware, listeners, my personal narrative is that the whole of the LJL is kind of like, okay, DFM's not representing us. We need to have our new representative go in hard and fast. They can't just blasé and then drop out of the play-ins.
And if you want something a little bit more tangible to kind of back up this, okay, the LJL's pulling together, remember actually a lot of these players, it's kind of an LJL tradition for players just to kind of flip between teams quite a lot. There's a lot of roster change in the LJL. People have been all sorts of places. Some people are more loyal to their team than not. But we've definitely seen a lot of roster moves, like you said. Ashi's been on a handful of teams. Paz has been back and forth a couple of times. In fact, he was back on DFM back in 2017, as far as I remember, both as jungler and
Ace as well has been a substitute for DFM.
Yeah, Ace has been around a little bit, although he's not been as tenured a pro as some of the other members on this team.
Agreed.
But so the LJL, it seems like V3 in particular found there a lot of resources to work with going into plans, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
We will indeed. Our next player to briefly cover is actually the player we know the least amount, and that's actually going to be Archer. Archer was actually brought onto the team by Boogie. Boogie had been playing Korean solo queue and was just kind of wowed by this guy and was like, this is a young guy, we can get him super cheap, lads, and I actually really like him and I want to play with him.
He's Japanese.
And it, yeah,
oh,
exactly.
No,
he's
sorry,
Korean. He's Korean. That's our last person that you can do that for. But Archer, Korean solo queue, what a god. I think he had like 1,000 LP or 700 LP on Korean solo queue. Like clearly highly mechanically skilled. Similar to another player that I had my eyes very high on. That was Honey, who has started actually showing that mechanical skill finally. But Archer was our rookie of the split and the season. And really just a phenomenal player coming into his first competitive year in a minor region as well. You've got to say that this kid has just got so much to prove, and he's already doing it in leaps and bounds, gentlemen.
Yeah, I think that spring was a hard learning lesson for Archer, but he did meet the challenge on more than one occasion. Spring playoffs will be a bit of that will be the lesson learned. I think that he ended up crumbling a little bit when his team needed him to perform, and he didn't quite. Then, of course, in summer, Archer really turned on the afterburners. I'm trying to think if there's anyone I'll put above him in the AD carry role from the LJL in summer.
There's Utapon was the one guy towards the end of it. Like, they were the best competitors.
I think it's only Utapon, really. And that's because that was the man in the finals who actually challenged him for once.
Yeah, it did. And it was the finals were really back and forth from the bot lane, and like a lot of it was on the rest of the teams as well playing on it.
And we can link it back to the LOL Ninja article where Paz was like, there's only 2 people in the LJL where I genuinely don't know how good they are and what they can do, and that's Aria, who we've already mentioned, whose ace is getting taught by and boot camped with. Oh, and Utapon.
Yeah.
Funny that.
Well, it's worth knowing that, Are is top 100 Korean challenger.
Yeah.
He's definitely at the top of the world in terms of the solo queue game, and he sometimes devolves his own team into the solo game.
Hey, if he has to win it, fuck it.
Yeah,
It's time for Cassidy and Yumi. Let's go.
And I get this podcast episode is about V3, but it's important to know that these are some of the teams that the LJL has in their region, and this is why we have some practice playing against some of the more messy, fight all the time teams.
I mean, V3 got a lot of practice coming into this year with the
Initia1ise.
They were scrim.
Before you go on that tangent, because actually that's perfect for our next one. Can we just cover our final support player? Absolutely. Thank you, sir. Rainer, our support player, and honestly, in my eyes, the most improved player between spring and summer. The man went from a mid to reasonably decent support player to just outright competing against Gang and as like maybe the best support player in the region. And this was a split. This was a summer split where we saw a few support players actually break out. Proud is like one of the big ones. And Grendel also both come to names. Huge improvement. And I think Rainer had most improvement. By the way, you have to ban his set. It's actually ridiculous that a support player's set is that scary, but it's
triple flex them. Triple flex. Because Ace also uses that pick really well in the mid lane.
And I'm sure Paz can probably play it okay.
I mean, he did it, and he did it in spring. I mean, like the other thing with Rainer is like my eyes were initially drawn to him basically after the Hawks game in spring, the second Hawks game, where he basically outplayed the whole of the Hawk squad twice on the tower. But I was like, okay, this guy's really good. I know I've had my eyes on Archer. I know he's been really good, but I think actually his lane partner in some ways is the one I think is sometimes the real magic maker in that lane, because he sets so much stuff up so well. He's very smart about how he looks for engages. His roams are very well timed. He is a great engage guy. Like, he's a very good set for that reason. He finds those engages when you need it. Very smart with his vision, plays the lane very aggressively, particularly at level 2. All of those things are pretty exciting, and when you do have that skill on a number of different champions, his Thresh and Set are the ones that really come to mind, then you should be very excited about this guy, because I think he is another superstar on the team. I really do.
I actually think his Tom Ken's really good too. It's a little less exciting, but...
Yeah, I know he was in spring,
But this is the thing, like, V3 just actually don't have a weak point in the team anymore. Even if we go arguably maybe Ace is the weakest point, well, he's got the best mid laner in our region, as well as maybe one of the better mid laners in the world mechanically wise. Assisting him with that you can't ask for much better. Honestly, V3 are a team that have had a story where it wasn't quite good enough in spring. Then they leveled up and they had dominance across the region, tying DFM's record from spring, going, hey guys, we can do what you do, and then promptly go on throughout the playoffs and everything and do it. And let's actually do that. Let's cover summer split, gentlemen, because spring is lovely to talk about, but let's talk about the newer, more recent stuff for our audience. Summer. How did V3 run in and, well, win the LJL?
I suppose the easy answer is that their bot lane and jungle are just really good. And sort of towards the start of summer particularly, they were playing very smart around the first 10 minutes and first jungle clear, or the level 1s for the jungle in particular, where Boogie on the likes of Nidalee, on the like Raves, was basically just dismantling opposing junglers early on, and then with the bot lane running like Thresh or Felios, shoving in super hard, winning the early skirmishes level 2 and level 3, they would dive bot, unlock that lane, and then just play through objectives from there. And that was just good plans, good champions, and good mechanics that got them ahead. It started shifting later into the season where they became a bit more team fight focused, honestly, which had been V3's slight weakness at points in previous times.
And that's actually
that did become a bigger thing.
Let's pivot on that team fight, Nymaera. If you could take that over and be like, how did V3 pivot? They looked dominant doing their thing, but then initially I said they changed and they adapted and they got better at more than one thing. What did they do?
So, if you go back to their 6th game in the summer split, that was versus Detonation Focus Me. This was the first game where V3 had found themselves not at a huge early game lead. And it wasn't necessarily on the same kind of comfort that they had. They had Lee Sin and Maokai in that game, which were not some champions which they'd really pulled out. I think that was actually it was the second Lee Sin game of the split for them. They did have their Aphelios Thresh, but this was the first kind of time where their lanes weren't being completely ganked to oblivion by Boogie. He wasn't super far ahead on something that could just kind of be an unkillable frontline in a Trundle or just the burst threat in the Lee Sin. And they fall behind versus DFM, who are a team which we'd had our eyes on, and they team fight their way back from it. They find the perfect team fight where Ebby overextends in bot side jungle, and they punish that. They punish it by pulling Gang out of position, which pulls the rest of the team out of position for a DFM. They commit to saving their top laner, and they pounce on it. They take a load of globals away, they get a huge amount of shutdowns, and then they get mid lane out of turret from that. Then DFM commit to a fight just after that, after everyone's back and respawned. If they lose another fight, V3 end the game off of that. It was a really good, concise way to look at how V3, even though their early game plan, which has normally been immaculate, if it doesn't go to plan, they do have ways to team fight themselves out of ruts.
And that being against Detonation Focus Me is huge, as any of our international listeners will be probably only aware of Detonation Focus Me, who we must sadly give the disheartening news of they actually had their worst split of all time, only having a 50% win rate, getting into still playoffs with a 7-7 record, as top 6 teams out of the 8 get into playoffs. So it's a lot more forgiving to get into playoffs, but because how the playoff bracket works over in the LJL, there's a long trip for them to make if they are to make the finals, which well, of course they do. But coming back to V3, by week 6, V3 Esports had 2 wins above any other team in the LJL, and that's at 11-1. They were dominant, and that's the only word I feel like really describes the level of that what V3 were playing at, gentlemen. They were just better than all, right?
And the one loss they had was a game where it's still, honestly, V3 were the better team in the loss versus Crest Gaming Act. You know, that team which has Arya, that crazy mid laner, which plays solo queue mentality. They kind of outdrafted themselves, and they didn't have a great win condition, and they still made the game competitive through Reiner and Boogie playmaking in the early game to make ganks happen where realistically they shouldn't have. I think V3 look so dominant because they make their job so easy by having really good vision control. Yeah. Resetting around the map well, because Reiner always knows when to reset to turn up to another lane. Boogie is pathing towards the fight almost with unerring accuracy. Whenever there's a fight, Boogie just happens to be there at the right time. And that's something it's a really big thing about how you're tracking the game, right? It's game sense, yeah. So I think that V3, the reason that they were so dominant is because they made their job so easy by doing this stuff.
And then scooting on, sorry, Initia1ise, we must keep scooting on, but I'm going to give you this next part, actually. V3 had one upset with CGA and Arya and crew, giving them, actually, we're still here, and guess what? I am the best mid laner, so do respect me, and which Nymaera obviously enjoys. We then zoom on to week 7, so a few weeks later. V3 are still very dominant. They come into this week with a record of just 11-1, phenomenal record. Going to week 7, they actually only go 1-1. They go 12-2, still 2 games above second place. Now, second place actually first and second place actually go into a gauntlet match, and then the loser of that drops into the lower bracket. So it's similar to a lot of fighting game tournaments, if any of you are familiar with that. However, there's only one upper bracket for 2 teams, and then the rest of the 4 go into a lower bracket. If you're interested, I do recommend checking out the wiki, which for the playoffs I will also be including in the show notes, lovely listeners.
It's certainly helpful to keep an eye on it.
But going into week 7, and then their playoffs team, Initia1ise, Sengoku were able to actually defeat V3 Esports. But in playoffs, V3 dismantled Sengoku. How did that really go through?
Oh, man. So what happened in playoffs? I mean, and to kind of offer some context, there was a question, much like there was in spring, of in spring as well, okay, how on earth do you bring down DFM? In summer, it was, well, how on earth do you bring down V3? And there aren't that many answers, but one of the ways that people were thinking about doing was saying, okay, if you can track Boogie, not even necessarily shut him down, but kind of new to him, try and make him a little bit impotent in the game, make sure he's having little impact, then you have some options. And if you can keep the bot lane curtailed as well, keep them stuck in lane, keep them caught under the tower, you have ways forward. And
But was Sengoku able to do that, sir?
They weren't, because what happened was Boogie had his team back him up at the early critical fights when you are on these snowball farming junglers. It was Lilia versus Graves in this instant with Boogie on Lilia. And the Blank has normally been to, a very smart pathing jungler.
Former Worlds winner?
Yeah, former Worlds winner. We know the Blank Knight. He has got a pedigree to him. He's a very smart jungler. And he kind of knew what he needed to do. He said, okay, I need to fight for this scuttle so I can...
Shouldn't have fought.
Continue to get this pressure. The problem is, the difference is not necessarily what the junglers are doing. It's whether or not the teams can back them up and how quickly they do so. V3 as a team sack waves just to come and help Boogie out wherever he's doing. They follow in the...
But then they do that for every member on the team. They do that for Archer. They do that for Ace. They do that for Paz. They honestly back each other up as a unit, right?
I mean, I will say it's primarily around Boogie and Reiner, because they're the playmakers, the guys who tend to be starting off play. So they tend to go to these guys.
And the person who's typically responding is Ace.
Yeah, exactly. Ace is like, well, I guess I've got to sack 2 waves for this.
And like for instance, like in the Sengoku series, he had a CS per minute of like 6.3.
Yeah,
which is
it wasn't good.
Okay,
it wasn't good.
But it just doesn't matter, because his jungler's got like 150 more DPM than the enemy jungler. His AD carry's got 2 DPM over the enemy AD carry.
And Pyrion just couldn't do anything, because Ace would be like vaguely throw the lane. I don't really care if I get gold. Okay, I'll go off there, and then and that was just partly the series against Sengoku. V3 playing around each other and dominating it, right?
Or specifically playing around, making sure Boogie gets to the point where he needs to. And particularly around those early river fights, river control, V3 are just faster than most other teams to get to that place. And once they've kind of won those early skirmishes, that's when the vision comes in, and when I suppose the way we've been phrasing it is macro fundamentals, when they are timing their resets, getting their vision down the right way.
Yeah,
but it's like that one quote from Halo Combat Evolved, they've always been faster.
But they're also controlled. They're faster, but they're controlled. They don't make unnecessary mistakes. They don't go blind aggression, similar to our lovely sisters over in the VCS. They're not blind aggression for the sake of blind aggression. Exactly. They are strategic but strong-willed. However, with that victory, that meant V3 went straight into the finals with a rather decisive 3-1 over Sengoku Gaming. That means Sengoku had to face against DFM, and DFM 3-0'd Sengoku in a very upsetting fashion. I remember coming into that matchup and we were very excited. However, that meant Destination Focus Me versus V3. DFM from the bottom as our 4th seed coming into playoffs, because they won their tiebreaker match, rallying through all the way from round 1, coming into the finals. We expected a match and we got our full 5, didn't we, Nymaera?
We did. Game 1 kind of seemed like, that victory I was talking about DFM earlier, that first one of the season, the regular season, where V3 just eventually just out-team fought DFM. It wasn't a huge early deficit game, but it was a game where V3 kind of bided their time. They pulled out a combo which they used in the Sengoku series of the Scion Lilia, and just waited for a sleep to land, and then just pummel them with the Scion ult at full charge distance. And then they just skirmished very, very well, and they got a lot of early dragons. Didn't really manage to pull that out in the next 2 games. They went down 1-2, and that's largely because in the next couple of games, DFM suddenly weren't losing the early dragons. They weren't forced into really awkward fights around the 3rd dragon, which is somehow, in a lot of ways, how DFM have failed the split, particularly around 2nd Herald, but it's not just that. Where they were forced into fights around objectives, which might end up ending the game, where, like, I don't know, they've got an Ornn and there's a Mountain Soul on the table. You can't really allow that to happen. That's an extreme example. I think one of the big things was that Ebby was playing a lot of Shen, and in game 1, V3 had a Scion pick to do very well with it. It worked with the Scion Lilia comp too, but in the next couple of games, Paz really struggled versus Ebby on Ornn and Gangplank, and also Ace was having a bit of a rough time versus Seros too. Just the whole team was not quite on the same page as they were in game 1, and it looked like DFM had kind of figured out what they tried to do.
However,
to kind of like add in on that a little bit as well, is it was Gang got his hands on Leona again, and this was like, it had been a while since we had seen V3's bot lane in a losing matchup.
Sure.
And they looked a lot less confident when they were kind of kept under as well.
Yeah, but V3 rallied back, and two games down, one game down. Match point for Dead Nation Focus Me. Is this going to be the repeat upon many repeats? Well, we live in the future, gentlemen. We already know that V3 make it. We already know where they are in their group stage. It's why we're doing this podcast. V3 rallied back really hard, and there's a few, and honestly, every member of this team came back hard and fought hard. Paz started not losing the 1v1 versus Ebby, and now his solo queue name in the Chinese server is Ebby. He's like literally he's paying homage to the man that honestly pushed him to the max. Boogie's Lilia. He's a one-trick Lilia, apparently, by the way, everybody. He's already the best Lilia player maybe in the world, and it's his...
the problem is Kanavi exists.
SOFM as well.
But that's the level we're comparing Boogie to, which is where we have to keep reiterating this point.
Yeah, it's worth noting. So Boogie had 4 games of Lilia this series. He had the highest DPM on his team. Yeah, even higher than Archer on the AD carry role and stuff like that.
He
had more He was the second highest DPM player in the series. The only person that was higher was the enemy AD carry, and that's mainly because he was just absolutely dumbstering people in team fights on Lilia.
It's also Utapon. So we also well, if it's the man that Paz says there's only 2 players I'm scared of, it's like, well, Utapon and Arya. It's like, well, that makes sense. That makes sense. Our aces, Zoe came in super clutch. DFM decided not to ban it away, not to even try and pick it away and have Syros maybe play Zoe for the first time. Nothing crazy. Didn't do it. We also saw that V3 were more than happy to face against Caitlyn, which was a huge priority pick. And,
it got a little bit, I will say it got a little scary because they went down a lot of gold that game and pulled it back because they're damn good team fighters. They are. They were like down nearly 5,000 gold.
But we know that script before. We did it with the 8k one once before, what Nymaera told us. Versus DFM as well, we can do it again, lads. And, well, we have to talk about Game 5 because that's where the spicy stuff comes out, gentlemen.
It does. So in Game 4, we saw that V3 did this double sleep combo with the Zoe and the Lillian, and just allowed them to bide time and catch out someone like Syros' Azir. Syros did not have a particularly clean game on that champion. Game 5, he ends up picking into that same matchup, the Zoe into the Azir. But then we get through the later... Also, it's worth noting that in this game, V3 first picked away Leona. They've been banning it apart from one game that Gang had got this champion in Game 2. They just couldn't deal with that pick. So they first pick it away. So that's what we definitely call a series meta, where you realize what picks, besides what the tier list of AD carries or whatever else is on the table, that's what you need to take away. They take that away, and then later into the draft, they lock in Aphelios. V3 only lock in Aphelios when they do this one thing where they lane swap him. They end up pulling out a lane swap, and I know that SK did that versus Schalke back in the ULCS playoffs, LEC rather. Wow, need to get that title out of my head. But and they kind of failed pretty bad at it.
Yeah,
it didn't really make it stick. But of course, V3 had pulled this out versus Sengoku in their first game too. But then you kind of picture this. So Archer had kind of bottled it versus... the V3 had bottled it as a team versus DFM, but Archer particularly would have been quite heartbroken by that because the carry role and potentially had on his shoulders. For in Game 5, to be your championship world spot deciding game, to be given Aphelios, a champion which is very mercurial, can be very good or very bad in any kind of situation, and have an entire team comp and situation early game plan designed to funnel you to a point of power you can run over the game, and to put this into the hands of the guy who couldn't quite make it work in spring, and to just say, look, go for it, that is the most anime energy I have had in quite some time.
And like, it wasn't even like the lane swap was like,
it didn't work really.
It was responded to pretty well, was kind of what I was getting. Actually, like, DFM bring Rakan up because they know the lane swap's coming on to go for the 2v2 with the top laner in support. Aha, we can trade this around. But it wasn't quite enough because it meant the Aphelios was just a step ahead of the Jhin at all times, and then they managed to push in harder with that like slight lead and get something from it, which was really impressive because even when the lane swap doesn't break the game open, the slight advantage it got was more than enough.
Yeah, it really was. And gentlemen, we must round this off now with our own personal expectations for V3. I'm sorry that I'm zipping through so many of these things, but we need to because time is of the essence. coming into this, we had medium to low hopes. I remember our tier list, V3 were a mid-tier. We were like, maybe they might be really good. We don't quite know. Their spring split remains... we need to see changes before we fully know what happens. They have made those changes, and now V3 have been able to showcase where they are. Coming into this, what are our expectations? Very briefly, gentlemen.
Coming into play-ins and looking through it halfway through summer split, we sat there thinking, there's another LPL team coming in. There's another EU team coming in, and EU looking like they have more depth than they have done in previous years. So what that means is that whereas before you'd have 2 wildcard teams make it into the group stage just because you'd have all the major region teams and then just 2 wildcards thrown as the last 2. Then you're suddenly thinking, shit, having an LPL and EU team chucked in, that makes things really, really hard. Then the VCS teams unfortunately had to drop out because of their national situation with their borders not allowing anyone back into the country. So if they left, they wouldn't be able to go back in. And now with PSG, with a lot of roster issues coming in too, things are looking a lot more heartening for V3, and I know that people are obviously going to have their eyes on teams like UOL, a very well-known team across the history of.
We'll cover them in a moment.
Yeah, sure, and a whole lot of other teams, and and a huge fan base for CB LOL and the OCE team, stuff like that too. The LJL is a relatively unscouted region when it comes to a lot of like the Reddit audience and stuff.
Yes.
I think V3 are much better than people are currently thinking right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And like as far as my expectations, I expect them to at least get to a best of 5. I do not expect them to be last. I think they are too good and they have too much. I think there is hope that obviously PSG are severely weakened in the group they are.
Sadly, but yes.
Yeah, and that's a real shame. It really is. But that's, on the other hand, their loss is V3's game. Exactly. Well, you do take those. And I think Unicorns of Love, obviously, are going to come in and look at a very similar space and go, excellent, there we can find something out of it. But I don't think V3 will be walkovers. I think they should be able to challenge UL and may well be able to beat them, actually, in terms of some of where they're strong. I think particularly Initia1ise will find Boogie a stiffer competition than I think he would be necessarily expecting.
So
which I think therefore gives us hope for this squad. I expect them to get a best of 5, and I expect them to at least have an outside chance of pushing some of these other teams around.
Yeah, so absolutely. So with the group stage, well, rather with the play-in stage, how it's going to be work is there's been a decision. Well, not a decision actually. There has already been a show where they did the group draws for both the play-in stage as well as the main event group. So if you're not quite sure of those, you can either watch it, or as always, as I'm getting better at doing this as we go through, I will have a link to the wiki, as I love supporting the wiki, as they have been very kind to us as well, with the breakdown of how worlds will work and the stages. We're going to mostly be focusing on group B, because obviously that's the group that V3 Esports are currently in, but we will also be covering Group A and our quick overview thoughts, as it is important that we do also talk about those teams as well in regards to V3 Esports if they are able to make it deep. How play-ins are going to work is you first off do a best of round robin. You do a best of 1 round robin, and first place just gets you straight into the main event, gentlemen. And that's like the big ticket, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And because it's only a single best of 1 round robin too, one classic wildcard upset could change the entire group stage.
Oh, it really could. I mean, I'm getting I was watching the CB LOL. They did a lovely video that Emma actually showed me, which actually showcased the history. I completely forgot that Albix Nox Lunas are the only team from the wildcard region to ever make it to the knockout stage of Worlds.
Yeah.
And that is still something that hasn't been done. And they are a team that ran it out and caused upsets everywhere from
also remember,
play-ins.
they beat like Prime Rock's Tigers.
Yeah.
Like, holy crap, that was something.
And a lot of people are making comparisons between them and the Unicorns of Love. But before we go on to that, I do need to finish off this. I just wanted to say how exciting this best of round robin is going to be. After that, the first place, as I've already mentioned, will be default straight into the main event group stage. However, the lowest team, that 5th place team, will sadly be knocked out of the tournament. Commiserations to them. Best of luck next year. However, that still leaves us with 3 teams. Seed 3 and Seed 4, so 3rd and 4th place, will play a best of 5 knockout game, and the winner of that will actually play second place in the opposite group, which is really important for us because honestly, this is why I think V3 Esports have high rolled. More than any other reason, I think this is why we high rolled, gentlemen. Because if we have to go against Liquid... I'm sorry. Boogie's going to have fun against Broxer. Just imagine that shit.
So, I think pretty much anything but last is workable for V3, right?
Very workable.
So, I mean, have we ran down the groups yet? For,
no, we haven't. Yeah, we haven't.
Do you want to do that quickly?
So let's quickly just run down the group. So Group A has Ints, Legacy Esports, Mad Lions, Paprika Supermassive, and Team Liquid. And for Group B, we have LGD Gaming, PSG Talon, Rainbow 7, Unicorns of Love, or UOL, and then our lovely boys, V3 Esports.
I love it. You just say ints.
And I'm like, I mean, that's what my hope is for them. Yeah, no offense, but
they did play Ari in their final, so I've got a bit of a soft spot for them. But,
true.
So I guess
they are trying to in.
Yeah, so I think the thing with V3 right now is that, so we were talking about PSG, have some roster issues, though their Korean players can't play, and also their AD carry Unified, who is a real core component of their team,
really good.
Can't play for all of play-ins. No. So he can play for like part of it, but we're not sure exactly when. Does that mean he'll play in some of the best of ones? Is it only the best of 5 / anything else that comes in after that point? We don't know yet, but if it comes to the point where like UOL get to face them, whereas I think I think actually even before that, I would have said V3 have a fighting chance, especially in a best of 1 setting against them, given that V3 had been very good in best of 1s throughout the regular season too, and the fact that PSG are a really slow team comparative to a lot of the playing teams, whereas V3 we talked about them like having quite explosive early games in the early regular season, stuff like that. And when you already have a matchup against one of the Pool 1 teams, we're like, okay, yeah, that's definitely winnable. The Pool 2 teams are suddenly like, okay, yes, this is achievable. We might actually be able to get some good results in this group.
So, gentlemen, on Twitter, I posted my personal playoffs. I grabbed this from the LPL caster Munch as he posted this lovely PNG. I predicted that V3 Esports would be second place, so they would be facing the ultimately competitor from the opposite side. And this is another thing where I think, honestly, we might high roll because I'm not super personally worried about any of the other wildcard regions. I would be far more concerned if we had to play a best of 5 versus the Unicorns of Love, Talon, or Rainbow 7 personally. Controversial, but that's where I'm at. I think we high rolled. If we can get second place, we high rolled.
So, I mean, I was asked a couple of questions on Twitter too, just through DMs and stuff about what I think of the group draw, what I think of the other things. LGD are really good. I don't think we... It's like 80-20 to LGD, even more than that, maybe. They're a really good team. They also have a very strong jungler in Peanut, so maybe Boogie can be nullified. But V3 are a team that have pulled out stuff. Like Lane Swaps, they've had some strange strategies going around. If they can practice some good old cheese, I think we can have one of those classic wildcard upsets. I think Unicorns of Love are a team which a lot of people are very high on right now. I think people are too high on them. I don't think they were pushed too hard in the regular season, although I will need to go review them myself. So I do think that if it was a best of 5 between 3rd and 4th between UOL V3, really, really interesting. I think that could go to like 4 or 5 games, but I don't think that's like a straight up win for UOL either. And then I look at Rainbow 7 and PSG Talon, and I think that we're probably favored in those matchups.
I would agree with you on that.
Like the thing with LGD is like maybe you can pull off what Suning did against them, and you hard camp Peanuts level 1, and you just look to win that, and from there you can tear apart the way LGD want to play. The problem is they've just got very strong laners. Like Shie is a monster. Frankly, he's a really, really good laner. I've been a fan of this guy for ages. Of course, he was famously on the WE roster with Mystic, who obviously ended up on a Freak of Freaks this year, and they were trying to hard carry their team from the depths for many years in the LPL, and of course, finding a team at Worlds again. He's very, very good, so I don't necessarily expect LGD to fall to anybody here outside of a big upset, which obviously can happen. There's just too much talent there. Maybe you can do it through shutting down the jungle level 1. Go again, look at that 3rd place match. It's how Suning did it, but comes with the questions. I think Talon are in a difficult spot. I think UOL and V3 should be an interesting matchup, but I completely agree with Nymaera. I don't think they were pushed very much in the regular season. The only team that really challenged them was Gambit, and even then,
that was even barely.
Yeah, and even then in the finals, like a Gambit threw a game they really shouldn't have done, and like that kind of thing. It's like, okay, you guys are good. Don't get me wrong. In fact, you are definitely a threat in this group. Never doubt that. But the way you play is a little bit bot side focused. V3 do that well. I also rate Boogie over an Anasic, and I think they have been quite reliant on Anasic to
That's
be...
a really fun matchup to watch, I think. Yeah, that'll be the big matchup in plans.
And I think just in terms of Boogie's pathing is smarter, frankly.
I mean, okay, so then we're already saying we're pretty... Obviously, we are biased towards V3. I mean,
of course. Yeah.
This was always... This is always going to be the case, and I mean, we're all trying to figure out where we think, honestly, one non-biased where we think groups will go, and I don't... Outside of LGD...
I think second spot is completely up for grabs.
I think second place is up for grabs. And also, over in Group A, Mad Lions and Team Liquid, I don't think are anywhere near as hard of a lock as they would like to be, as I could easily see 2 out of the 3 wildcard teams upsetting them big. And that's the Brazilian team. Like, I'm scared for Brazil. Honestly, I'm happy we're not with them. I think we high rolled not being with them. I'm scared of Brazil.
Yeah, I think that Turkey's the big one, really.
Yeah, Supermassive.
I know that Yamato was also
Supermassive's
saying
huge.
that.
Is it Cacao on that team?
Yes, it's Cacao.
Yeah.
Fuck that.
So, one of the best junglers of all time has, of course, not necessarily back in his Season 4 form, has ended up somehow in Turkey in the depths there. Zeitnot, very famous. Zeitnot and Snowflower, actually, both players have really, really storied at this point on that team too. So I think that they have, again, the individual talent. I haven't really looked at a lot of their games yet, so I'm going to refrain from placing them hard.
I'm less knowledgeable on their solo laners.
Yeah.
But still, there's a lot to be surprised about and excited about. Gentlemen, now, how far do you think V3 are going to make it? Do you think we're going to make it deep into the knockout stage and we might lose to a second place team, or we might be a second place team and we might lose there? Or do we go into groups? Looking at where we've got now and the most amount of information you currently know, you can just be yes, no, I don't know.
Okay.
I think okay, go on.
I don't have a lot of faith in Rainbow 7, so I think I can wipe them off. So that's one team out. Talon are in an awful space. It's not their fault, but that makes it difficult. Put them down 3rd, 4th. That means we're probably competing with UOL. And we've already mentioned where we think LGD is just a cut above.
Well, honestly, my research for LGD is actually we're very comparable to them in stats and a lot of things. / we're better than them in a lot of things. Granted, the amount of matches is still equivalent,
it's
and then
also
we've been doing
LGD's competition is like top esports.
But like
JDG.
where they pull
and IG and FPX. And,
But then actually, some of these teams have been looking less competitive than they previously had been, and maybe LGD was at the top of the rest. It's also very important to see how this play-in goes for LGD. If they are shown to be slightly weaker than they are expected to be, that's going to cause problems for analysts going forward, because LGD are going to be a huge benchmark for how JDG and top esports are seen. Because if there's cracks there, that shows play-in teams in wildcard regions, and that means also major regions are going to be able to crack LGD and top esports and
the thing with LGD is, like, again, I need to go back and watch that 3rd place match again to really make sure I'm getting on this right. I feel they still fall into that trap of just picking fights a little bit because they see them. Whereas like,
skill checking,
JDG, whereas like JDG, top, Suning even are a little bit playing for something, even if it's like, okay, we just have the item advantage here, we can go for this. And sometimes that can catch LGD off guard. Of course, often they can do it because they're very talented, and like mid jungle is dumb, like their bot lane's great. Bin's a role player, but that's sometimes what you need when the rest of your team is doing mad stuff. Sometimes you just need to sack away to teleport in.
So where are V3 gonna end up, gentlemen?
Second, 3rd for me.
Second, 3rd.
I think I'm there with you.
Yeah. How do we think they're gonna go in the knockout stage?
So if they are second, they'll be facing one of the teams from Group A, which is, I mean, as much as I think Mad Lions and Liquid are potentially upsettable, I think that they do have a very high standard of play, so I think they're
we also might not have to play them, because if they're 1st and 2nd, they'll be on the opposite side always.
Well, that's the thing, exactly. Right? So I'm trying to figure out who would be coming through in a best of 5 setting. So I'd imagine
Supermassive.
it would be Supermassive or maybe Mad Lion. I think I'd actually maybe Liquid might outdo Mad. Oh shit, no.
So
probably
I think
Liquid
Mad
comes in.
Lions
So I'd just do
also, well,
Massive
one
War.
of those two by default get the first seed in my eyes.
Yeah.
Which means
yeah,
the second
yeah.
seed is on the other side. If Team Liquid is second place, we won't ever have to play them. That means we only have to play Supermassive, Legacy, or the Brazilian team of Ints.
I
INTZ.
think,
INTZ.
I think,
It's just
yeah,
Ints.
I think my eyes. I think in my eyes it'll be Mad going through first. I think they have a better matchup into Liquid.
I've predicted that.
Basically because I think Liquid, and I mean of course Liquid are a very smart team. They've got very storied players. You know, I'm more than willing to see this change. But from what we've seen of them, they tend to play
slow.
they play quite slow, and also their style is quite like, okay, I'm going to play one of these three champions. And against a team like Mad Lions are very creative. Like these are the guys that pulled out Senna Wukong. There is absolutely a world where like Impact picked Mordekaiser and there's just like they've got something ready for it, or it's like, yeah, we're gonna run like Ashe, Thresh, bot lane, and then they watch Cars, you go, well, I've got Draven, watch me. And you know, like, there's that kind of thing where I just think Mad Lions are a more versatile team, even if they are a little less consistent, I think is the way to put it.
So let's quickly just break this down. So we're all predicting V3 Esports second or third. I've already put them definitively off the internet as second, personally, as I honestly believe
I do
that would
think
be
that
best.
it depends, because I know that V3 are playing PSG on day 2 of their schedule, so there's a chance that Unified is back.
Maybe
that makes things harder. And also it's just single best of round 1, like we're saying. So I don't expect them on paper to go fourth, but I think it's a quite a sizable possibility because of the chance of an upset.
I write off the chance of them going fifth. Like, I'm just refusing to acknowledge that's a thing that could happen.
Yeah, that would be very bad.
That was, well, we just go, well, we got it wrong, lads. We got it wrong. Doesn't matter.
Whoops.
Oh, well.
Let's delete all those Reddit comments.
Nah. We stick by them because we're like, we don't disagree with what Pastor said. We just look a little bit sad. Do we think, now quickly, gentlemen, that V3 will make it into the group stage?
Yes,
I think
but not
yes.
a solid yes.
I think yes.
Yes, but not a solid yes.
Okay, so tentative yes and soft
so put it
yes.
this way, I think if you have a best of 5 where PSG turn up and they come up second, and you have a best of 5 between UOL and V3, that could go 5 games. And I think that I wouldn't be like, I would favor V3, but not heavily. And again, this might seem disrespectful to PSG or UOL or whatever, because I know we've been talking down on PSG. But if you look at like UOL stats, they're like, okay, for a team which really crapped on their region, not a great first blood rate. It's only like 60%. Actually, let me just go check what it is.
That's surprisingly low. I would assume it would be at least in the 80s minimum if they're that dominant. Okay, while you're doing that, Nymaera, Initialize. How far are V3 going to make it in your eyes? Are they making it to groups, or are they going to just stay at the very top of play-ins? And this is a sign of things to come, maybe, for moving up, similar to UOL.
So I think, in my eyes, I think V3 get to that best of 5 that decides whether they get into group.
Okay.
That best of 5, I then think is a 50-50.
I love how we're all basically around that mark.
I think this is the best chance of Japanese team will ever have of doing that, but it's also one of the things we're bringing in
currently
styles but it's styles from around the world with teams that could be good, could be bad. We've kind of said, not convinced by Rainbow Seven from what I've seen and heard of them. PSG are in a difficult spot. That is great for V3. UOL are the competition. I think one way or another, either we end up in that sort of third place space, fight our way to the one above, or we end up in the second place and fight whoever comes up from the third, fourth on the other side. Then it gets interesting.
So, gentlemen, first Nymaera, that stat, please.
I was just saying, particularly in the UOL thing, like, actually the stats are kind of all over the place for both teams. So you've got UOL with like a 68% first blood rate, which is not that high for a team which only lost, one game?
No, one, yeah, the whole split.
Yeah,
they had a perfect run in summer as well. 14-0. They've joined that elite club of 5 teams, I think I found when I sent Initialize. That whole crazy research paper I did.
Summer, there was an Immortals. Oh no, there was like a TSM split.
Me and Sam have access to a document I did. I need to send that to you, Alex, just so we have all. Yeah, because I was like, I'm bored one Sunday evening, and I'm like, I'm gonna find out how many teams are perfect splitted. But that's insane that So what do you know V3's first blood rate?
So UL have got like 68%.
Yep.
V3 have got 83%. With like a 90. So on blue side, it's like a 92% first blood rate for for V3, which is crazy, right? So yeah, and okay, so looks really good. You go to first tower, UL have like a crazy first tower percentage, 90%. V3 only down to like 60%.
Wait.
First dragon slightly towards V3 at 56 compared to first two. First herald
Wait, they
slightly
don't
towards
get
UL.
first dragon? They have first turret, but they never. So they're always trading turret
Yeah.
for dragon, right?
Well,
Okay.
and of course, it depends on your depends on the side of the map and junglers and bot lane stuff
Sure.
like that. But yeah, I think that it's not necessarily a very one-sided statistic kind of win for UOL. It's not. V3 again had a very dominant split. Of course, they did struggle a little bit against DFM in the finals, and they did lose that one game with Sengoku in the playoffs. But it's not like a team which has been hyped up as much as UOL. They don't have that crazy overwhelming on paper advantage.
Gentlemen, it's why we are the believers and why we are spreading the word of V3 Esports, because every time I talk to someone about Boogie, they don't even know who he is, and I'm just like, you've missed maybe the best run of a jungler to have in a wildcard region for a while, and he was a relatively known name but kind of unknown, and now at Worlds, I'm so happy he's back to the international stage, and hopefully he can showcase the pure mechanical knowledge and skill and just so many things around how good he is and V3. Now, gentlemen, we're going to stop talking about V3 and the LJL and kind of all of that now. We're not even going to talk about wildcard regions. We're actually going to do something that we normally talk about off air, but we're going to bring it on air for a very short period of time, and we're going to be wrapping up the podcast, dear listeners, with this part. So if you skip the V3 part, it's going to be a very short episode for you, but it's important that we have all of this. And lads, so coming into the groups, what are your overview thoughts of coming in? Obviously, the groups themselves we've been announced. I've got some vague notes here. We don't have to follow them perfectly. Sam's given us a gorgeous document of his thoughts regards to all of the groups. But coming into this Worlds, what's your thoughts?
NA is screwed.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I totally agree.
I just think that the level of teams this year is so ridiculous, and the groups and how the pool situation has turned out in terms of like NA second seed being in pool 3, not pool 2, and stuff like that has been. It's led to these group draws being all over the place, and like, okay, you can say that TSM in Group C, okay, so they're against Fnatic, not necessarily the hardest Pool 2 team, and Gen G, not necessarily the hardest Pool 3 team, but actually they are pretty damn good, and you're likely to get LGD if they were to qualify, because they can't be in any of the groups. So suddenly they're like, okay, even TSM, who might have had the nicest, who have the nicer group out of them, and FlyQuest, who have to play against freaking DRX and top, like, it is such a hard ask for the NA teams to get out. And I'm not necessarily an avid NA fan, but I do watch the region. I just think it's so difficult just based on format for them.
Okay, I guess if we're kind of starting there on Group C, that group is currently TSM, Fnatic, Gen G, and that final spot, if they were to win, would have to be LGD, because the other three groups have a Chinese team in them. So LGD would have to go there. That group then becomes really, really, really hard to call, because none of the teams are out and out favorite, and none of the teams are out and out bad, which makes it you have got this really rough time working out who on earth gets through. And in some ways, it could be luck of the draw, who gets the better scrims, the better practice, the better read on the meta.
I'm sorry, if
very tough.
if LGD sadly get upset and don't even make it there, I think any of the teams that get put there from our side of Group B are going to stomp. If they can beat LGD, if they can beat LGD, think about it. If they knock LGD out, that means they're as good. Oh no! I only mean not just that, but also if LGD don't make it through the knockout stage in the best of 5, because if they're knocked out of play-ins,
that makes it equally likely for a Group A team to get in. And
no, because it's Europe. Because Mad Lions and Liquid couldn't go into that group either, so it has to be a wildcard region.
That's very true. You are very true.
Now, that's why I'm saying they will stomp, because if they're able to get into that group, they're going to look at TSM and lick their lips, because they're like,
yeah.
we just beat LGD.
I think of the groups, that's
It's the easiest group, but even then, it's like that's the prime group that any wildcard region want to go into, right?
Put it this way: if a wildcard group gets into groups, no wildcard group is getting to knockouts. None of them.
Probably not.
The level of the level of the LPL and the LCK teams and the top EU teams is just far too high right now.
So don't you want to get into Group C because that's only got a Korean group in it and no Chinese groups and no Chinese teams? That's the best one. You just have to be NA and EU. That's easy. We can do that.
Sure thing, buddy. Sure thing.
I believe. Sorry.
So like I'm saying, so the thing with Group C, I think if we stick with this one is, I kind of put my name out and said I think it's Fnatic and Gen G that get through.
Even if LGD get in.
Yeah, even if LGD get in.
I think it comes down to Fnatic, right?
Yeah, because I think that's just it. Because I think Fnatic are very mercurial. Specifically, Bwipo and Hylissang are so mercurial, but they are really good when they're on.
I think Reckless is playing really well right now.
Yeah.
Yes. I think it hurts Reckless a little bit that Senna's been nerfed, because I think he's actually quite a good Senna player. Sure. That's a bit sucky.
But it also hurts Double Lift, so...
Yeah, it does at the minute. Ironically, really, considering how long he was
Senna player and now best and then bad.
Yeah, he's very good. I generally put Gen G ahead, basically, because I think Ruler and Life are just fucking insane. Like, they're really, really, really good. And I think Nemesis has struggled to find an effective champion.
I think Nemesis
he's pretty good in semis.
Exactly. He's got things like Lucian he can pull out, and that's fantastic. I just need to see him on more stuff, and that worries me a little.
But even if LGD make it into that group, he's still the worst mid laner, because GA is just gonna destroy. And there's Bjergsen, who is the best NA mid laner of all time, probably.
I think my issue is that I don't expect. I think Broken Blade has been basically being say like, I'm going to play the super aggressive champion like Jax and just really run at you, and
that's not going to work.
Well, the other thing is that Bjergsen's been playing things like TF, and people have and people have not been punishing that pick in lane. Like, you can absolutely punish that. And when you're against the likes
back to 2016 when they were in the group with Samsung, and he was getting like solo kill by Crown's Victor on a Zillion, which he'd just not been punished on before. It's like, well, yeah, there are players of that caliber which can do that now.
Yeah, and like I worry a little bit for TSM's playstyle. It's like, okay, we will basically have Broken Blade go nuts in the top side and just join up with him with TF and stuff. And I worry against the likes of BDD and Xie, most likely that's going to be quite tough.
I mean, even as a former TSM supporter myself, I just don't see this being the year. I think I think the level of play at Worlds has just gone so high, and the only team that I thought could represent NA properly was C9 before they all fell apart, sadly, and now I'm kind of like, eh.
I mean, that's kind of my thing as well, is actually like TSM, like, this is not taking away from them at all, because I think they've really improved. Actually, I think Bjergsen in particular, like, before I go elsewhere, has been on the best form I have seen him
9v1
since 2016. Like he is looking so good, and I'm very excited to see him at Worlds against some of these other mid laners. But I've still got a couple issues just in terms of actually some other teams in NA have really fallen off, and that's as TSM were on the rise. It's like, that really frustrates me, because I would have liked to see, if TSM were going to come first, that they did it against a full strength C9, that Liquid hadn't got mildly figured out. All of these other things as well.
So Dom was saying this on Face Check, that the NA teams all went to 5 games against each other. There isn't a massive deal of difference between all 3 of them.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because when he said that, I was like, oh shit, FlyQuest was a best of 5, Liquid was a best of 5, and when they played each other, it was a best of 5. So it's that's a problem for them. Gentlemen, I don't want to spend too much more time on Group C, so let's move over to Group B, the Group of Death. As it's been coined.
I mean, there are 2 potential finalists in that group. There's JGG and Damwon, who could all have very reasonable arguments to say these are finalists. They're very much top 4 teams at the very least. So then you're sat here going like, oh, bloody hell, everyone else in that group is going to get absolutely shafted. Still best of 1. EU and best of 1 with some crazy picks can always do some weird stuff. But you've also got, it's also Rogue, which is the EU team in that group. If it's someone with like the more mercurialness, like you're saying, of Fnatic or G2, maybe... Yeah, of course they weren't.
Can you imagine if the G2 was in that group?
No, obviously, you can't have that. You can't have that, right? Just because the way the pools were working. So it's only Rogue that could have ended up there.
Or FlyQuest.
Yeah,
sure. But then, in terms of the EU teams, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Apologies.
But then you look at Rogue, then I'm like, okay, Finn, he's not awful, but you're putting him up
been
against
struggling the
like
second half,
Nuguri and like, oh god, it's just so crazy. Zoom, that's the guy I was trying to look for his name. So I was trying to remember Zoom. Yeah, you look at these guys and like you cannot give these people any kind of openings. They just end up winning the game through one lane.
And the thing is, it's not just Zoom. It's not just Nuguri. It's Nuguri and Canyon. It's Zoom and Canavi, who are possibly in contention for the best and the best top 2v2 players in the world right now. They are really good.
For any of our listeners,
Inspired doesn't play around top.
Well, for any of our listeners that don't know, Damwon were decisively the best team in Korea, winning their finals in 3-0 fashion, right?
It was slightly sad to watch.
Yeah, oh no, it was. That's why I'm trying to remember. I was like, was that the quarterfinal match? Oh no, the semi-final match, which was more interesting, or was it the finals, which was the sad one? And then JDG had an epic battle versus Top Esports, which we will briefly cover in when we cover Top Esports. But like, this is like, regardless who the wild card is, I don't care who the wild card is. This is the worst group to get put into, lads. This just
you could be Liquid in that group if PSG don't.
Bless Liquid.
If PSG don't qualify.
Bless Liquid's got the
Liquid. So if PSG qualify, then NA have to go into Team Liquid has to go into Group A, and then I think by process elimination that you have to have Group B being
a wild card or a different.
It has to be wild card or PSG. I think at that point, yeah.
Which sucks, but.
So if like, oh god, so if PSG actually, I'm gonna say PSG are likely not to qualify.
I don't think with these roster problems.
I think it's a really sad space for them. I mean, maybe they pull it out. Maybe the quality of players there, maybe the quality of coaching is there.
Yeah, they do have some really good. It sounds like we're disrespectful, but like, don't act as like it's a done deal. PSG are getting through. I think there's a very real chance they don't, even though they are technically one of the major regions, because they do have multiple seeds.
But it's not crazy to assume that all these teams are scrumming against each other, and all we've heard from so far is Boogie is very positive with the scrimming so far. The man is very happy with how things are going.
He's also on all the streams doing this Chinese super server stuff. He's like high enough rank to be on those things too.
And
so then you look at oh my god, if Liquid gets into Group V, they are so shafted.
It's like wait,
it doesn't matter who they are.
It's like wait, we made it and you're screwed because you've got potentially as Nymaera started with this, and we're going to end it with this. Sorry, apologies. I want to just get on to our next group. Initialize. We began with this statement. We're going to end with it. It's the finalists group.
Yeah, it's up there. It's up there.
It's one of the best groups we've ever seen at Worlds.
Definitely up there.
Like, I mean, the top three most likely candidates to win World are Damwon Gaming, JDG, and Top Esports. There is some wildcard dark horses in the likes of G2 and Gen.G.
And a quick little tidbit to end this group off. As we're going to Group D, Damwon and Top Esports can't play each other until the finals, gentlemen.
Damwon and JDG, Top Esports they could do. It's only if you're in the same group, you can't face each other until the final.
Oh, is that it? Oh, okay.
Yes.
So
you can't face a team from your group until the finals.
I fucked it up there, lads.
You get put into the opposite side of the bracket.
I think we'll find out how it goes.
But yes, it's that's phenomenal just to think that they can play each other in groups as a best of one, then will never play each other again until the finals.
Unless they both make finals, yeah.
Which would be phenomenal, gentlemen. Let's go and talk about Group D. And, well, this is the second group of death because it's first place China, second place Korea. And instead of Rogue, it's feels bad man for FlyQuest, isn't it?
And a likely Mad Lions too.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, before we go too much in this one, like, I will say I think Top are by far the favorites in this group in the way that Damwon and JDG, we expect
I think Top
a little
favorites
more
the tournament by quite a long way.
I agree. I think Top are the favorites. No, there might be matchup discrepancies, maybe where like it's just the playstyle. Someone has a better playstyle against them, but on paper, I'm there with you. I think that's true of everybody. We get to see Knight at Worlds finally. Oh my god, I am so excited. 369 at Worlds, the man who plays Quinn in the top lane, like happily as a counter pick. He's a Fiora player. I am so excited. I'll keep going at some other time. But
also
Dragon
a
X,
PCS jungler making a stand.
Kasa.
Come on, representing the region, even if the rest of the region has some problems. And we'll cover the only PCS team that are actually in groups by default because of how the seeding works and the qualification similar to BCS. Kasa representing. I'm sorry, I had to make that shout out. I'm sorry.
Kasa's such a storied player. He is one of my favorite League players. He was around back in like season 4 on Flash Wolves, back when I was watching
season 5.
Season 5 was huge too when Flash Wolves were... Well, that was when like the LMS were the Korean killers.
Yes.
But like Flash Wolves were the team that could actually take a game off these guys, and they were like, and they made things very, very interesting around like MSIs and all the other stuff too in later years. Yeah, no, I think that I look at, oh god, it's just such a crazy group D. I'm just saying, like,
I mean, like what I will say is I do think Dragon X are a little bit more vulnerable than some of the other Korean teams. They are
I would
more
agree.
inconsistent. I think Gen G are more consistent. I think, and I'll also say that it sucks that Deft is off form. Like he has been dealing with some injuries. Like he's got serious back problems.
Same as Uzi,
like
right?
Same as Pawn.
Pawn.
Oh, is it not Uzi? Pawn, okay.
And actually, and you saw it in the finals. He kind of got a little bit dismantled in that bot side, and that's a bit worrying. And the top side is a little bit less flexible than a lot of the other Korean teams. Before, hang on, I'll just let me finish my point and I'll pass over. So like Pyoshik and I believe it's Rascal for Dragon X. No, so it's Doran, isn't it?
No, yeah, it's Doran.
Yeah.
Are a little bit newer, a little bit younger. Pyoshik in particular has picks he's great on, and other times he just looks really inting.
But they got his Chovy and LS
but exactly.
loves Chovy.
But we have potentially the two
Chovy.
best. We got potentially the two best mid laners in the world going up against it.
Well, we don't have
like to throw his
Aria.
hat in.
We don't have Aria,
Well, look,
so is it really a competition?
Deities aren't allowed. Deities aren't allowed on the
that's
stage.
true,
I'm sorry, man.
Nymaera
but you know, we do get Chovy versus Knight. Showmaker would like to throw his hat in the ring, but that's always good. And we got to hope as well that Deft, with a little bit of time off, a bit of time to recover, can come in and be a genuine threat. We know he can be. So I expect them to come out second anyway.
And also remember, Deft is one of the most proficient players in downing Chinese teams in history. Remember, this is the guy that slaughtered the LPL when he was there. You know, he was on EDG, and he just absolutely crapped them. He was the guy that was making sure that Uzi was not making it into international competitions, because this guy was so good. He was the guy denying him MSIs, denying him everything else. And he's always been that guy where, like, when he goes up against an LPL team, Deft is the one guy like, oh yeah, Korea has this narrative around them where they're not necessarily as good at fighting in these messy situations versus the LPL, and then there's Deft.
Remember, Deft was part of that Samsung Blue roster where Samsung overtook Worlds, and one of the, like, they ended up only losing to their sister team of Samsung White. Like,
and also Samsung Blue in that year were better than Samsung White. It was only at Worlds where Samsung White bested Samsung Blue. It's the first series they won against them the entire year. It was great to see. But
they won the Spring Championship in 2014, taking down Najim White's sword, and Deft has just been a phenomenal player. As we've already mentioned, EDG, he just dominated everything, won all the playoffs, and basically said nothing to anybody else. And honestly, it's going to be phenomenal to see him back
White
in.
Shield. That's a team I haven't heard of.
Back with
Gorilla.
They had.
Well, they also had. Was that Goong and Watch on that team? I think it was.
Yes, it was.
So Goong was a guy that could play only like 4 champions. He could play like Zed, Caster, Oriana, Ari, and he could do nothing else. But those 4, he was one of the best, like the best player in the world on those champions, pretty much.
So, what are our hopes for? Sorry, bringing it back to Group D, gentlemen. Sorry. Are we just expecting Dragon X and Top Esports, or is there potentially a wild card that could come in and contest, or has Flycast actually got a chance? Like, Wild Turtle's pretty high on his chances, even still.
It would have to be Mad Lions that go into that group.
Okay, and Mad Lions would dismantle and do Mad Lion things.
I look at that and I think, like, actually the mid laners in that group are really, even Power of Evil, really good player.
He is.
I mean, he's always shown up in
He's
international
been
competition
really
too.
good,
It's his
actually.
first time back to the international stage since he's been in NA. So I look at this and I'm like, Chovy and Knight, really good. But actually, honestly, Power of Evil has played against Faker in 2017 Worlds, and he was doing pretty well in that matchup and all that other stuff. Like, this isn't...
He's a good player.
There are a lot of matchups, even though there are, like, there's a huge team diff there. I think that there are some matchups where I'm like, yeah, I'd love to see that.
I mean, also saying Torin has been internationally well, actually performed well internationally. Wild Turtle has turned up and sometimes actually has a decent performance. So,
I mean, like, I will put this out though. The thing with FlyQuest is like their big strengths have been their mid and jungle.
yes,
Like their bot lane in recent weeks as well has been pretty good, and Ignar is a very good player.
well, he partially got them
But
there.
but for better or for worse, Ignar can sometimes leave his AD carry out to try because he just doesn't want to lane, and that's really frustrating.
Which is
for
fair.
People playing with him, but like you're also saying like our strength is our mid and jungle. Like Santorin and Power of Evil versus Casa. And Knight.
Yeah.
Oh
no.
and then there's Chovy on the other side. You're like, and like it's all well and good when you've got those strengths, but when your strengths are being outmatched, that's scary. And then when you've also saying, like, in the finals, Solo was left out to dry, man. Like, it was silly.
He was.
And you're doing that against the likes of 369, who is got so many counter picks as it hurts. Like, you look at his roster of champions and when he's getting to pick things. Like, Knight doesn't get counter pick. He just says, I pick Syndra, and then you do what you want with me.
So,
whereas 369 gets Quinn.
So,
he gets Fiora, you know.
So, I mean, that means it's probably unlikely FlyQuest making through. We're predicting currently, tentatively, and obviously this is before any games are played. Obviously, once you see those first few games be played, then you go, actually, I think it might go a different way. Lastly, gentlemen, we must quickly give our thoughts regarding Group A before we actually close out this podcast for any closing thoughts, as we're trying to keep it on a tight leash this episode.
Indeed.
Group A, G2 Esports, Muchie, Sunning. We've already mentioned Sunning, how they're their own little entity, similar to our Rascal Jesters of Spring. They are kind they're kind of a crazy, bigger, better version of what Rascal Jesters hopes to one day become. Muchie, our PCS representative, and one of the few minor regions that actually gets a slot. Obviously, we're very sad the PCS don't actually get to represent on the group stage, which is unfortunate, but sadly, this is the life we have to lead. And then we have the former finalists of last year's World's G2 Esports, who reclaimed their top spot at the very end. God, they had to fight for it, and they had to make a bit of a song and dance about it, but they did do it, and it looked rather good towards the end. How do we think this group's going to go, and who can be slotted in here as the wild card or minor region?
Yeah, I mean, before I throw over to Nymaera, because I took a lot of the last group. I mean, in short, this one is the group of life. This is the group where G2 are pretty happy, Suning are pretty happy. Honestly, Matchy's not entirely disappointed in some ways.
No.
Like, at least it's third place LPL. Like, there's something to that. So I think
it's not a traditional LPL team playing as well.
No.
I mean, saying it's the group of life means okay. Do I completely agree with that? I think that I would say that technically Group C is the group of life. I think because I look at like TSM, Fnatic, Gen G, and they're not like all completely locks for top 8 teams. So like, you're likely going to have a team coming out of Group C that maybe is punching above their weight. Whereas in Group A, I look at like G2 and Sunning, and I'm like, okay, yeah, no, they probably deserve to be top 8 anyway. So maybe I'm thinking actually like this was slightly more top heavy than Group C, but like average level might be slightly below because you're likely to get someone like TL if PSG comes through, and also you have Marchi in there too, which are not the same level as teams like, I don't know, like Genji and JDG and the other.
But they were a team
teams.
that did 3-0 Talon. PSG Talon, like that is...
Yeah, but Talon looked really bad in that series.
True, but now
like,
Talon are also going to look pretty medium in the play-ins because of roster problems. So what does that mean moving forward? You know, like,
I do think that Group A is a group where a wild card worthy to get in there if some weird stuff went on with the teams that get out of play-ins. Maybe something can happen there because we know that G2 have occasionally gone Hakuna Matata.
Yes, feed into the madness, Nymaera.
Yes, I think that Marchi, I don't want to write them off. Absolutely not.
No.
I think that they had a very good summer split. And, you know, they were toe to toe with Talon the entire year. They played for like a best of 20 something.
Wild.
They've played like 20 games this year. I know that DFM and Sengoku had a similar story when they had like their 2 best of 5s in spring and all that other stuff. But like, I think that Group A, it's probably the lowest level of between each of the groups. Would I call it like the group of life because of that? Just on definition, I'm not sure I can, because I'm like, G2 is still like maybe semi-finalists and
exactly. I mean, like I still think G2 are a dark horse for the tournament. Like, and like they've got the talent. They've been less dominant than they were last year. Make no mistake. Bot lane inconsistencies worry me with that squad, and also like, has Jankos put time in to actually pick up things like Lilia yet? Question mark.
I mean, personally, the things I don't have to worry about is Caps is already one of the top 50 people already in the super server after a week of in quarantine, which is just absurd. Wanda is quietly forgotten about, but was basically the man that, in my eyes, actually won them their series. Personally, I think he's a rock, and he plays World of Warcraft more than League. Like the man's a beast, honestly. Perks is also playing phenomenally on solo queue, so
Well, Perks, I think, has had a bit of an... I think that he's
had a rough year.
But he's playing a lot better now.
Yeah, he is. He's getting there.
I mean,
he's getting there.
But he's still making some weird mistakes when like he had one really good Ashe game.
True.
It was game 1 versus Fnatic in the finals. So I was like, oh, yeah, actually played really well there, and he did a lot of the heavy lifting and stuff for his team. But he's still been making some uncharacteristic mistakes compared to how he was playing last year. So I think that G2 are not infallible as they were last year, like Sam was saying.
And they've always been able to
think...
drop in games. Like they've always been the team that just.
So I'd imagine G2. Well, G2 versus Sunic. I'd imagine it's actually a bit of a toss-up for first spot there because of the Hakuna Matata nature of G2.
Personally, for me, actually, Nymaera, a lot of my weight gets carried on how how the play-in stage actually goes.
Yeah.
Because I want to see the power, because this is something we haven't seen. We haven't had an international tournament all year, and this is one of the first international tournaments in the world, really bringing in international talent from everywhere.
We had the mid-season cup and we had the mid-season showdown.
But this is where every region is being represented, and this is why it's
the first one in this season. Yeah.
Well,
So,
and it's
like-
in just general sports as well. This is like why Worlds this year is such a big thing for just everybody, because it's like, well, we haven't actually had any Worlds competitions this year. The Olympics got cancelled.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes things quite hard to read. I mean, like, the thing with Suning is they have Sword Art, who's a monster in the bot side, and that could be trouble.
And their substitute support is called OO.
Yeah.
Oh,
But what I will say is I think Angel is pretty categorically outclassed by Caps. And, you know, like, an SOFM is great, but it's not like Yankos is a walkover. And Ben is largely a role player. He's not really, generally speaking, a carry player. If my notes are correct.
Well, with that, also, I just want to round us up here. So if you've got anything quickly, you want to end that sentence on Initialize, and then we'll move over to closing thoughts.
I was supposed to say, with the exception of Jax, which
Okay.
played pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely agree with you on that one. Jax might actually be something we're actually going to see far more in Worlds
Maybe
than
a
I was
little bit, think so.
expecting.
Maybe a little bit.
I was expecting 0 games, and now I'm actually thinking we might see like 4.
I know VCS was playing it. It's really good into
Broken
Mordekaiser,
Blade
which
plays
people are
it.
blind picking quite a lot. Broken
Yeah.
Blade plays it. Yeah, I think we could see it.
Which is surprising to me because it wasn't quite where I was expecting. And a friend of mine that has Pax Jax is actually loving his life right now. So bless him. Gentlemen, certain teams haven't made it. No T1, no FPX, no IG, or even Cloud9. Honestly, that's really sad for me. I was really high on Cloud9, sadly not making it.
Rip Faker.
Rip Faker, Rip
Rookie.
Doinby, so much. So many good players didn't make it, but then they weren't at the caliber to actually make it this year versus their competitors.
Yeah, I think that shows that there's the ever unstoppable evolution of League of Legends. Just stuff has changed so much this year. It's why we've seen so many of the typical first seeds from regions suffer and bounce back, or not quite bounce back enough in the case of T1. And then next year is going to be even worse because we've got an entire item overhaul, and the entire way the game's going to be played is going to be changed, which means I have to relearn the game, but that'll be one hell of a thing to track.
It's not just junglers relearning the game for once. It's everybody initialized.
Welcome to my pain. I mean, I think particularly for the LPL as well here, like the fact that your top 4 are, you know, you've got Top Esports, JDG, Suning, LGD, and then below that is the likes of Invictus Gaming. Below that is the likes of FPX, of RNG, of EDG. That is a ridiculous strength and depth in that region right now. I think Korea largely has been a bit of a step down, I think.
That's what a lot of people think, yeah.
Outside of Damwon, who I really do think have stepped up in the summer.
Considering how like last year T1 was carrying Korea really hard internationally.
Yeah, I would agree.
And even then they still lost to G2, so...
Well, that also shows the rise of EU talent, but which has been a narrative. And while it did peter out a little bit towards the end, and the old tried and true Fnatic G2 came back to the top, we're seeing glimpses now on what the next dynasties could be for EU in Mad Lions and Rogue, or at least maybe not those teams, but these players.
Did you just hint at Old Kings versus New? Because I think there might be a lawsuit coming your way from Berlin very shortly.
Well, I can say this stuff because it's on our own podcast, so I can say my own views and opinion. At least the podcast won't get sued. I'll just get sued. Nah, they won't do that to a Brit. They love us, right? That's how that works. Oh, the Nymaera's giving me the eyes. Oh, no. Oh, no. Gentlemen, that is actually going to end us over here with everything, really. With Worlds, with play-ins, with everything. There's a lot to pack, and this is not going to be our only podcast. We've still got a week before any the world's playing stage, and we see our beloved V3 playing. They won't be playing on the first day, as that's taken by Group A, but they will be on the next day on Group B. We'll be having another podcast probably before that match does happen. But gentlemen, any quick thoughts before we end this podcast right here, right now?
This is it. This is crunch time. This is where everything leads up to. Getting a little bit spicy, getting a little bit anxious about everything that's going to happen, particularly because no one's mentioning V3 at all, and I'm hoping that we really don't get proved wrong and that we think V3 are good. But there's also a lot to stand to gain from it, because if we do have some really good games and we get into a best of 5 versus a well-known team, that can be a really good advertisement for our region. If we do make groups, it's going to be absolutely huge. So I hope you stick with us and believe in V3. Let's go.
I mean, that's just it. We're staking our colors to the mast. And I think, hopefully we're not being deluded by having watched V3 all year, but I genuinely think they're a very good team. I think from what I've been hearing from a few analysts who have been paying attention, they should be pretty competitive, and fingers crossed they can do us proud here.
V3 fighting! We can do it, lads. I believe in V3. We've got Boogie, we've got Reiner, we've got Archer, and now Paz and Ace have fully figured out how they play their game. Honestly, I'm more looking forward to this more than any Worlds I think I've ever watched since my first Worlds back in Season 2, where I became a TPA fanboy. Honestly, I doubt we're going to see what happened with TPA. I honestly would never bet any money. Yeah. But honestly, if V3 can make a group stage, I'll be blown away. If they can just have a compelling best of 5 and be that third place, the Cinderella almost team that quite make it, but then get dashed in the 5th game, at least there'll be a statement, and it looks far better for our region as well. But I'm still pulling for that group. And gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our podcast. It's been an up and down one, but we've covered everything in a nice amount of time. We recapped everything that with V3. We covered play-ins, how it works, and our thoughts and expectations for each of the teams, and in Group A and Group B. And then we gave our brief thoughts about the actual group stage and World itself. Thank you so much to everyone for listening, and we'll see you all very, very soon. Don't go anywhere.